Archaeology today is now dead.
Perhaps the extremely defensive, arrogant and patronizing attitude of mainstream academia is stopping us from considering that possibility.
They're just crackpots. They're crackpots masquerading as intellectuals.
Yes.
Because the things that they're saying are completely bizarre. They're all, 100% of them are captured by this woke ideology.
They're
100% of them. They're weird people, man, because they exist in this structure that's been completely compromised. And that's our education. Our higher education systems have been completely compromised.
Hello, everybody. My name is Flint Dibble, and I'm very happy to see you here. And I want to talk to you today about pseudoarchaeology and some of my own personal experience from going on Joe Rogan to debate Graham Hancock, and sort of the ways in which I think about engaging on social media, and why we have to speak up and engage and support each other who are engaging. This is extremely important in my own mind. So for those of you that don't know, Graham Hancock's brand of pseudoarchaeology is that there's a lost advanced civilization from the Ice Age that taught hunter-gatherers all that they know. So that's what I'm going to focus on. And look, I want to be clear. I used to laugh at this shit too.
I believe that the Nile, when it used to run up close to the pyramids, and the water would run underneath the pyramid, and that would create something called physiostatic electricity as it ran underneath that magnetized crystal granite. Those ions would pour up into the chamber, move up the grand gallery where there used to be resonating rods. But you can see the slots where the rods used to be. They're removed now, but the slots are still there. Then it would be pushed into the king's chamber where it would be amplified and some type of fusion would take place, then forced up through the apex, and then the crystal granite obelisks around the region would capture that ambient wireless electricity. And then if you had something called a JED, which looks like a Tesla coil, you can capture that energy and you can transfer it into a device for gold electroplating, for any other electrical tools you need, like some of the tools they had to have used to create some of these incredible works of art. We can see the tool mark, so we know they had the tools. But they had wireless electricity way back then.
That's insane. If that's true, that's insane. Because you would think there would be some kind of physical evidence of a device.
Mm-hmm. Look, I know it's really silly that people believe this from our own lived experience doing actual archaeology, but it's real, and we have to speak up. The reason why is we live in an environment, a social political environment, where fake news, misinformation, and disinformation are having real impacts on things like the public discourse around climate change, vaccination, higher education, research institutions, all the things that we really care about and that make our world good are under threat right now. And archaeology is part and parcel of this public discourse. Over the last several decades, pseudoarchaeology has become increasingly popular, with shows like Ancient Aliens on the History Channel leading the charge. If you look at searches for English language words in English books, you can see that Atlantis in particular is the granddaddy of all conspiracy theories and pseudoscience. It is mentioned more commonly in books than astrology, JFK, UFOs, creationism, numerology, the moon landing, crystal healings, and ancient aliens. It's also mentioned more commonly in English language books than Pompeii, the Sphinx, the Acropolis, and Stonehenge. These are real challenges that we face, and this has been documented clearly as well. Polls out of Chapman University show that about 50% of Americans believe in Atlantis or a similar lost advanced civilization from the Ice Age. So this is pervasive, and we cannot blame our fellow Americans and citizens and people around the world for believing this, because it is presented as legitimate in mainstream sources. Places like Netflix, IMDb, and Amazon all list Graham Hancock's Ancient Apocalypse or his books as legitimate archaeology, as do newspapers like the Daily Mail here in the UK and the New York Post in the US. So we cannot blame ordinary people who have not taken any university level classes on archaeology for believing this stuff. And so we have to speak up. And there's also this clear relationship between Graham Hancock and other pseudoscience influencers and politics. So, for example, Graham Hancock is one of the top guests on right-wing political podcasts and YouTube shows. We can see him here. He's in the list with all these other right-wing individuals. So there's a clear overlap and relationship between politics and pseudoarchaeology.
Back in the 90s, authority figures were the gatekeepers. They controlled everything. If an authority figure in a discipline like archaeology said, Hancock is completely wrong, he's made all this stuff up, that would generally be believed, not by everybody, but by the majority of people. Today, to have a mainstream authority figure say that to me is actually an advantage, because people are so distrustful of authority, and rightly so, because we've been lied to by authority figures in all fields for so long. The bullshit has been so enormous that people are finally waking up, and we can't trust what authority figures say. And
I think we can thank the internet for that.
we can thank the internet for that, yeah.
What is arguably the most compelling example of a lost, ancient, globally connected civilization, and which just so happens to be the most controversial, is this symbol here.
The problem is this whole narrative of climate science has been adopted by these same fucking people that want Twitter pronouns. It's the same people. It's the same sort of thing. And if you have anything to say about it, if you want to talk about a swastika being an ancient symbol, now you're a Nazi. If now you're a climate denier, you're a vaccine denier, you're this, you're that, you're a Holocaust denier. It's like the same kind of stupid shit.
Real quick, you mentioned the QAnon shaman, as he's called. I forgot his real name, but I know it, but I met him. I was at a America First conference. I was invited to here in Phoenix I think it was November or December, and last year, and he was there. And everyone's getting pictures with him, and I chatted with him, and he was extremely lucid and smart, and very, as you mentioned, like he follows Graham Hancock's work, and it turns out that he knew my channel, and I chatted with him for a bit. And that guy is completely different than the way the media portrayed him. He was dressed up like a wildling, wearing that freaking barbarian, whatever you call it, the Viking hat, and shirtless and all that other stuff. And but if you talk to him, his IQ, he's a smart guy and very inquisitive and very down to earth.
Just as there has historically been a clear relationship between pseudoarchaeology narratives that strip indigenous people of their credit for their own heritage, and colonialism, as well as white supremacism. This is well documented in articles published by the SAA and elsewhere, and it's something that should motivate us to speak up.
I'm interested by things like this. I don't know what to make of them. These are Olmec figures from Trezopotes. In the center is a picture of Pharaoh Khafre wearing the Nemes headdress, and I'm just intrigued by the fact that these Olmec figures wear a very similar headdress to that. I don't know what to make of it. I'm not saying that ancient Egyptians went to Central America. I'm not saying that Central Americans went to ancient Egypt. What I'm suggesting is that maybe both of them inherited a shared idea from an ancestral civilization that was ancestral to them both. And then in the same Olmec culture, we have these images. On the left, the figure that's often referred to as the ambassador. And on the right, the figures called the danzantes, the dancer figures from Monte Alban. I mean, Flint, what do you make of these figures? What sort of ethnic group would you think they belong to?
I don't identify ethnic groups like that, man. It's a stone carving. That's not how we identify ethnic groups.
No, I'm not actually interested. So good. So you don't identify an ethnic group, but do you see beards on these figures?
Yeah, and people all over the world on every continent have beards from different ethnic groups.
It's just curious that amongst the Olmecs we have this, and we have this, and we have this, and I'm just intrigued by that. I don't know.
That people look different. Yes.
I don't know what it means exactly. But I do find it intriguing.
And I see this as actually an example of the problems here, because you cite Spanish colonial literature about, say, a white Quetzalcoatl coming. You talk about this as different kinds of people. Yes, you do in Fingerprints of the Gods.
We've got to get correct on this. We've got to get correct on this. Are you saying that the whole story of the bearded, pale-skinned Quetzalcoatl was a Spanish invention?
Yes, I am. I can show you a depiction of Quetzalcoatl from the Spanish period.
I can show you
want me
depictions.
To show you? Wait,
I can show you depictions too.
No, can I please get the... Here we go. This is Quetzalcoatl on the Borgia Codex. This is from before any Europeans arrived in the New World. Yeah. This is on a hide The ink has been analyzed, the hides have been analyzed, and this individual has tan skin, no beard, but a feathered headdress because this is the feathered serpent guy.
Well, actually, we can't see anything from that image, but that's not the point that I want to make. The point that I want to make is, do you think that the Spanish deliberately imposed an idea of Quetzalcoatl on the
I think
Mexican?
That every single source that we have of white skin in indigenous Americas comes from Spanish sources, and therefore I see it
quoting indigenous sources,
but quoting them inaccurately because people quote things in biased ways. This happens all the time.
How do you know they're quoting them inaccurately?
Because again, we have earlier representations
is there a
of these individuals that show they don't have white skin. This is the document, Graham.
I like Hancock. It's kind of like listening to like some Third Reich archaeology, but without any of the baggage, so that I can watch it with somebody else. It's actually a good way of kind of introducing somebody to white superiority. Is you'll be like, hey, what do you think of this book? And then you give them a copy of that. And if they agree with it, then that means maybe they're open up to reading maybe something like March of the Titans or what have you later on. But it's a nice little intro to racialism. Or at least I think so. That's my opinion.
And so this is kind of the big picture background. But this topic of pseudoarchaeology, we oftentimes think of it as sort of at a remove. And I want to make sure that we realize that this has an actual impact on the day-to-day archaeology that your colleagues are doing right now. Your colleagues are being impacted as pseudoscientists go on YouTube or brag about breaking in and trespassing on archaeological sites. Graham Hancock in Fingerprints of the Gods brags about bribing the guards at Giza in order to climb the pyramids.
We had a local guy who made contact with all the guards around the pyramid. We paid him money, I forget the exact amount. He said he'd paid them off. But then when we got to the base of the pyramid, we had to walk all the way around it, which is a considerable distance, 750 feet along each side. We had to walk all the way around it, and then we had to add more money to each of the guards at the four corners. And then we went up, and my advice to anybody who's climbing the Great Pyramid, which is pretty much impossible these days, either legally or illegally, is go up the southwest corner, because the southwest corner is pretty intact. It's pretty much a straight line.
Jimmy Corsetti, one of his acolytes on Twitter and YouTube, has recently been bragging about breaking into sites in Turkey in order to do an archaeological audit of them, despite the fact he has no experience and he's just selling lies.
I basically went there with the intention of conducting an archaeological audit of sorts to evaluate the entire situation with my own eyes and, of course, my camera lens. So this video is part one, and I'm going to share a number of alarming and disturbing things with you. And my next video will be part two, which will really put the nail in the coffin to show that there is something incredibly wrong happening at Göbekli Tepe, and the entire world has a right to know what it is. On-site security specifically instructed us to not take any photos or videos of these holes. The guy literally stated that it is, quote, prohibited. And to be honest, I still would have taken the photos anyway, but the truth is that we had already taken the photos and videos prior to being told that we weren't allowed to. And that was simply due to our small group having split up, and he was taking turns visiting us around different parts of the site at different times. So unfortunately for him, we beat him to it, and he never had any idea. And I honestly have absolutely no regrets for possessing these photos and videos.
As well, it's been very clearly documented in several publications the impact that pseudoarchaeology and pseudoscience has on local communities. For example, this publication about Gunung Padang documents the floods of New Age tourists that have showed up in Indonesia after this site has been proclaimed Atlantis. And so the site and the local infrastructure cannot support all these tourists, and it has major impacts on the site and the community itself. At the same time, there's a clear relationship between pseudoscience and the impact on vandalism and looting and forgeries. So on the right is a pseudoscientist, Marcel Foti, who believes that the pyramids were built out of conglomerate blocks that were, geopolymers. And he proves this by acquiring a stone from Giza, licking it, and telling us how salty it is, because that proves the science that it's a geopolymer. Or on the left, we have images of these granite vases that there's a whole cottage industry of YouTubers that acquire these on the black market. Some of them are perhaps legitimate archaeological artifacts that have been looted and smuggled out of Egypt. Others are possibly forgeries. And there's dozens of YouTubers that do analyses on these artifacts and claim they're too precise to have come from primitive Bronze Age technology. They must have been made with machines.
Let's dig a little deeper into where they found this vase.
While in Egypt a few years back with his father, Alex met Adam Young, who happened to have a couple of ancient pieces in his possession, including this vase. Artifacts like this do come up for sale or auction from time to time, usually from estate sales or from private collections.
So here we learn that the vase was part of a collection owned by Adam Young, who acquired the pieces from private owners. As you may know, trading artifacts across international boundaries is illegal. Laws are different for different countries, but generally speaking, if the objects were obtained after 1970, it is more likely they were obtained illegally. There is a flourishing illegal antiquities market, and this causes a lot of problems for historical investigation, as you might guess, not only because it encourages the theft of artifacts from archaeological sites and prevents us from ever knowing where artifacts came from, but also because it encourages the creation of archaeological forgeries. Fake artifacts abound on the antiquities market because dealers can make a lot of money selling them to unsuspecting customers.
So this has real impacts on our sites and on what we do. At the same time, I want to highlight that the next slide shows human remains. Here it is. These are the tridactyls, these so-called aliens that were presented in front of Mexico's Congress. And it turns out that these were formed from a combination of indigenous archaeological human remains and animal remains so that they could return a C14 date that shows that they were ancient.
The most intriguing criticism of the mummies to me is that the back of a llama skull looks very similar to the face of the mummies. A Peruvian paleontologist named Dr. Rodolfo Salsas-Gismondi provided this video and gave me permission to use it for my documentary. It does look strikingly similar to the facial structure of the mummies, and in my opinion, it's the best physical evidence that skeptics have put forward so far that shows that these might have been manufactured.
And so this is the kind of damage that is done to this heritage here, just disrespecting and desecrating human remains as well as archaeological artifacts. I'm done showing human remains now. And they also target our colleagues. This is a very clear targeting of our colleagues. For example, this email that Graham Hancock published when he complained about not being able to film at the Serpent Mound in Ohio. He showed a series of emails between him and Ohio History Connection, which manages the site, and he redacted the email addresses and names of people from his production company, but he left up the name and email address of people from Ohio History Connection so they could be flooded with trolls.
I want the main antagonist, and that's John Hoops from the University of Kansas, and John Hoops from the University of Kansas is a coward.
This is what Dan has to say about Professor Hoops.
No. He's an asshole about it. He's a liar. He will put falsehoods in a journal and pound at people, block people, and throw rocks at them from behind that block box. He is deplorable, you could say, underhanded. And that's because he's fighting the worst parts of himself. Thanks a lot. You guys have a good day. We'll see you next time.
And he really hates archaeologists as a group of people.
Most alternate historians have some sort of an issue with archaeologists. Now, I don't mean archaeology as a science, not the field itself. I mean the scientists, archaeologists.
Ugh, this is just petty abuse, man. Nasty hatred towards people whose sole crime is to have an underpaid job that researches the material remains from human history and prehistory. Why? Because we tell the truth about Atlantis, that it never existed, and that believing in it is like believing in flat Earth. That's just scholarly consensus.
Archaeologists are lying about the history of Atlantis.
His acolyte Jimmy Corsetti has done similar things.
I honestly cannot believe the current state of modern archaeology today. It appears to have been corrupted, or at best, totally mismanaged at such a level that is now preventing us from actually learning information about our ancient past.
He has, for example, after the SAAs published a letter denouncing ancient apocalypse. Jimmy Corsetti replied by doxing the entire board of the SAAs, their names, their photographs, and their emails. And he said that these are people that are making these decisions and they should be targeted. And in particular, when somebody asks him how, he said that they should review their books with appropriate reviews on Amazon and appropriate reviews on ratemyprofessors.com. And that happened to Professor Bill Farley.
There's this one guy, he's a huge YouTuber. He's like 1.5 million followers.
Oh, okay. It's not who I'm thinking.
No, and this guy, he convinced, he directed them at several people. One of them was me, and asked them to write fake reviews about us on the internet.
Oh, I saw somebody else talking about this, I think.
Yeah, it might have been Hoops or somebody, one of those guys. Because it was, or Flint Dibble maybe, might have been. So we were, so I had like 15 fake Rate My Professor reviews appear. That was like very weird day. And I tried to get them taken down, and they deleted some of them. Some of them are actually still up, and they're hilariously fake. They're clearly written by like 62-year-old men in their basements who definitely have never taken my classes. But they also called my employer, tried to get me fired. I had a whole day on the phone with HR and my dean and the police department, the university police department.
Us professionals, those of us with an education and decades of experience, we have this knowledge at our fingertips to be able to understand the context of the actual evidence we have. And so in today's ecosystem of information and misinformation, us professionals need to be speaking up. At the same time, we cannot rely on the media and on public science communication to actually represent us adequately. So often we see headlines saying that archaeologists are baffled. We are constantly baffled and shocked and surprised and stunned by everything that we find. This is just, we are perplexingly confused at the mysteries of the past. If you listen to the media or to YouTube or to social media or really anywhere from CNN and documentaries onwards, it's all about mysteries and us being completely confused.
The Osceola River has some of the densest terminal Pleistocene and early Holocene occupations in the American Southeast, or definitely in Florida. We don't just do random dives. We go back from the known to the unknown. We look at terrestrial patterns. We look at cultural types. So periods where people were using shellfish as a subsistence base. It's really important to look at those sites on land and say, what are the factors? What environmental patterns or cultural patterns can we tease out of these larger distributions? And then we project it offshore. And if we're fortunate, then after we pull all those threads together, this is what we get.
And in fact, it's never about the hard work and the expertise we have, but we're just fucking lucky. So look, we have to stop relying on the media and on science communication. Science communicators and journalists are phenomenal. Many of them are our allies, but we cannot rely on them. They do not adequately present what real archaeology is to the public. And so we need to speak up for ourselves in today's world, and we cannot rely on going on documentaries because we can be clipped out of context, and we cannot rely on journalists. I mean, these are real. This is like the Independent. This is solid newspapers, by the way, that report these headlines, not just clickbait places like the Daily Mail. And we live in a world where our field is under threat from politicians in DC or in Westminster, our local universities that are cutting our resources for education or for funding. This is a real problem that we all face every single day, whether we are professional archaeologists working for commercial firms or the National Park Service, or whether we are teaching at universities or not. We are facing these kind of threats. And so we need to be able to do a better job of demonstrating our relevance in order to protect our field.
And so what we're seeing is a complete defunding of the humanities and the social sciences and history and archaeology, anthropology, classical studies, and more. And so please, if we care about understanding these mysteries from the past, we need to fund being able to teach people. We need to fund the actual research into it.
Can I stop you? What's the motivation behind defunding archaeology?
Saving money.
To put on what?
I have no idea. New buildings. We don't actually cost that much. Most of our research is funded through grants that we competitively get, like my grant that I use to do my isotope analysis, or it's funded through private donations.
I can't understand how, with our knowledge of history, it's so fascinating that archaeology would somehow or another be underfunded.
Yeah. It's real bad. UNC Greensboro just cut their anthropology, archaeology department.
Yeah, it's crazy when you consider what our culture does spend money on.
Right.
Yes.
That it's not spending money on finding out who we are and where we came from.
Exactly.
Finding out about our past.
Is there better evidence that we're sick?
Yeah, it's very good evidence that we're sick.
That we don't want funding of our past?
So because of all this, I decided I have to speak up. Right. And I wanted to do my research on how to do this. And one of the key things is don't amplify these individuals. There's a whole series of studies that show that well-meaning responses can actually amplify these people. So I focused my response to punch up only at the top individuals who are already extremely popular and already have the public's ear, so that I'm not amplifying anyone who does not have that. So that's really important. Another key thing is studies have shown that debunking doesn't always work. When you debunk a piece of pseudoscience or disinformation, what you do is you repeat the false claim first. Then you demonstrate why it is false. And studies show that people usually remember the first thing they hear better than the second thing that they hear. So you're actually unwittingly amplifying false information by doing a straight up debunk. So we're better off doing things like pre-bunking. We want to inoculate people against misinformation. So you should be working in teaching against pseudoarchaeology in your classrooms. And when you do address the public, you should be aware of some of the pseudoarchaeology that's extremely popular out there, so that you can try to pre-bunk it and inoculate what you are talking about and use it to not let it slot in with these pseudoarchaeological theories and conspiracies. Next up is something called a truth sandwich. Because the first thing is what's so sticky, you start off with something true. Start off by describing how archaeology works, why we think the pyramids are tombs or whatever it is. Then debunk a false claim, and then end with something else that's true. This is what's called a truth sandwich, and it's the most effective way to be able to start addressing pseudoscience or misinformation out there. And so when I went on Joe Rogan and talked to Graham Hancock, I intentionally crafted a strategy using this research. And I intentionally tried to pitch it to the audience that would be listening, which would be mostly young men. Warning, there's a graphic scene on the next slide of erotic pots. So this here is an Athenian red figure pot. It was my very first slide.
Here we go.
All right, so look, one of the things that I see when I'm online or in person sharing archaeology is I find it's tough to get across what it is. And so I wanted to start with a fun example. Okay. So I understand that maybe not everybody can see the screen. So Joe, do you mind actually just kind of describing what this artifact is?
Oh, you're putting this on me, buddy.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, this says Athenian red figure from 470 BC. And it is two people having sex. It's a man on top of a woman. You see his penis. You see it's it's very graphic.
It is very graphic. So what do you think this shares about what archaeology is? Any ideas?
Well, I mean, you're finding artwork and parts of civilization that were left behind and, have been around, in this case, since over 2,000 years.
Yeah, and for a long time, scholars thought that a piece like this described sort of life in Athens. And they connected to Athenian texts, sort of like Plato describing people having sex even, right? And on the other hand, however, every single piece of Athenian artwork with graphic sex like this, couples actually fucking with penises and stuff like that, ends up in Italy. It's part of an Athenian pornographic export market. And Kathleen Lynch and Sean Lewis and others have published on this. And so the real point is that what we're looking at is the painters are designing something for consumers in Italy, and particularly in Etruria. And this instead fits better in with telling us about life in Etruscans and the kind of stuff that they show in their tombs, sort of romance between people, or the kind of sexual scenes that they designed themselves in Italy as well. And the whole point here is that archaeology is not really about an artifact. It's not about a monument. It's about our patterns.
Showing a graphic sex scene. All of these pots are part of an export market. And I wanted to start with it to grab the audience, of course, but also to show that archaeology is not about studying an artifact. It's about studying a context. And the context for all of these graphic scenes on pottery are from an export market from Athens to Etruria. So that's what we study, right? And second of all, then that let me lead into the big data sets that we have that present the context that archaeology has. And with that, I drew upon my own experience as the son of an Ice Age archaeologist to present the Ice Age evidence against a lost civilization from that period. And then, of course, to draw on my own experience as an archaeological scientist and environmental archaeologist to talk about the environmental evidence against such a lost civilization, introducing agriculture after its downfall. So I went through and I reviewed the totality of Ice Age sites we have, from underwater archaeology on coasts and in deserts, like this survey conducted by Devolshevsky and my dad in Egypt. And I brought in, for example, some plant remains.
So this is a maize cob from about 1250 AD. This is part of the Southern Methodist University Archaeological Research
That's how little
collection.
they were back then.
That's how little they were. So if you want to hold it, you can.
Sure, yeah. Chuck it over here.
Be careful.
So how old is this?
That's from about 800 years ago. Wow. Yeah. And so I want to thank Matthew Bullinger.
Full
yeah,
piece
that's
of
a
corn?
full cob, yeah.
Folks, this is like a thumb. Not even my thumb. It's like one of my smaller fingers.
And discuss the traits and evolutionary processes behind domestication to demonstrate that it was not an introduction, but these were in situ domestication events locked in time from wild progenitors to domesticated crops. And this turned out to be extremely convincing. I convinced thousands of people. I've seen thousands of posts on social media, directed at me or not, about people that were convinced, finally, that they believed in, some of them for decades, some of them just half-heartedly, others were full on in. They were convinced that it was just entertainment, and they believe now in real archaeology. Now, this did have a severe backlash. These people have large platforms, and they've worked hard to try to convince their remaining followers that I'm a liar.
People like Flint just out and out lie.
And they've told their followers to contact my university to get me fired.
What Flint does is very different.
Yeah.
Because he's influencing millions of people. And so, a bit of a hot take here, but I think he should be fired. Like, you shouldn't be allowed to do.
But I am all for doing like properly organized activism in those regards, and a fucking letter to their employer and stuff. But like a mad dash of 5,000 people sending hate emails is never going to do anything.
Well, you'd be surprised if someone gets to work on Monday morning and they have 5,000 emails to read. They're gonna make sure that stops. Like they probably won't outright sack him, but they'll tell him to shut the fuck up.
Yeah, that's true.
And after making over 20 videos attacking me, he especially hates me. In a recent video, he suggests targeting professors by taking a page from the Chinese Cultural Revolution instigated by Mao in the 1960s.
The Cultural Revolution. Basically, he told the country that they had a bunch of capitalist bourgeois influences worming their way into their communist country, and they need to be rooted out. And the way he did that was weaponizing the students and the youth of the country. Students would put their teachers on mock trials and thump on their heads and even unalive some of them. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that that's what I want to see happen. I'm saying that it's a time-honored tradition to bring students into your fights on things like this. If you watch a political YouTuber and they go around and talk to people, are they not usually going to college campuses, right? There's a reason for that. Those are the minds that they want to change because those guys get out there and do shit. It's a natural human thing for young adults that are coming of age to punch up at power. They don't want to punch down. And believe you me, if you want somebody who's going to punch at power, you don't want to go above the power that's messing with you. They put those people there. You want to go to those that are already upset with these guys. Imagine a student who got a bad grade in one of these teachers' classes finding out that they like to lie to the public. No, I'm not going to do any of this. Personally, I don't like bringing things into meat space, as us old people call the non-internet world. Even though, like, every now and again, I think that, contacting one of those activists at John Hoops University would sure be funny. I still, it's just not how I roll. All right. But I know that a lot of you guys do that. And I understand it, man. These guys have pissed you all off. They pissed me off. But I hope that you would recognize at least that trying to get them fired is less effective and looks worse to the public in general than just informing the students of the kind of teacher they have. I mean, John Hoops recently said about me, make sure and call Dan Richards and not debunking so that he always has to live with his actions. And I try to find the tweet. I'm not sure about the exact wording. He has me blocked, so it might be a little tricky. But at any rate, that's the kind of sentiment that he expressed about me. And I just think the same thing with the students there. They should know that they have a liar for a teacher. They should know that they have a teacher who's being dishonest or something like that. If you're wanting to take this into meat space, let me be very clear. This is not a call to action. I don't want to do it. I'm not going to do it. But I do know that a lot of you out there will do it. Do this sort of thing. So if you're going to do that sort of thing, don't email their dean. Email those pissed off students that are already yelling about this stuff to begin with. It ain't going to take a whole lot to take a student that's already yelling about NAGPRA problems and point them at the person that could be helping, claims that they are fighting racism, but is refusing to undo the racism of the university that they sit in. Stuff like that is easily weaponizable and is going to be far more effective. But again, not a call to action. I'm not going to be doing any of that. I'm going to be sitting here drinking a beer.
He literally wants his fans to seek out our students in an attempt to harass and silence us. This is scummy behavior to involve other people, to involve our students just because they ended up in a classroom with me at the front of it. This is outright anti-intellectual cancel culture using methods from friggin' communist China. These people are the biggest hypocrites in the world. And all this kind of jazz. But I want to emphasize, look, I'd rather they come after me than all the random colleagues that they've been targeting, right? I'm actually gaining popularity from this, and I don't regret this. I have no mixed feelings just because Joe Rogan calls me a liar. I believe that I have stood up and made a difference, and I think that we all should. And I think we need to do a better job of rewarding those that work and do this hard work in the public. But I want to just make sure that we understand that this does work. Look, when I first started doing public engagement on Twitter back in like the middle of 2015 is when I started, I mostly was tweeting into the void. I was tweeting out my research, little snippets and photos and stuff like that. Nobody fucking cared. Not in the least. It got no engagement until I started having a theme to it and writing threads that had a bit of a narrative. And this was classical zooarchaeology, where I wrote these little threads that described how we study animal bones. What were animals to the ancient Greeks? These kind of broader questions. And immediately people started reading. Even my very first thread, I only had 300 followers at the time, all friends and colleagues, and 20,000 people saw it very immediately. And within months, I started getting real attention. This is just a few months later, between March and July. And you can see that within just a few months, it went from me tweeting and getting, surprisingly at that point, nearly 200,000 to 400,000 impressions in just a few months. So it's so easy to share stuff on social media. And I want to end by giving you an example. I'm a zooarchaeologist. I teach about animals. This example from an article written by Michael McKinnon, one of my professors that taught me animal bones. And in fact, this started with me as a student listening to him give this lecture. Then I adapted it into my own teaching lectures. And then I posted it on Twitter and Blue Sky and elsewhere. And it's been read by hundreds of thousands. It's the story of the Yasmina dog. And so the Yasmina dog is from a cemetery outside of Roman Carthage. And when the Yasmina dog died, it was, quote, not very healthy, but lived with a variety of dental and skeletal ailments for quite some time. This was the dog from the phrase sick as a dog, as I like to put it in my funny way. So you can do this with images. I know maybe not everybody in this room is a zooarchaeologist, but look at this skull. Look at it closely. Something's not right. What's missing? All the teeth, There's no teeth in these crania. And in fact, if you look here, the tooth sockets have filled in with bone. All the teeth in these tooth sockets were lost before the dog died. Or you can look at its hip bone. This is a healthy dog pelvis on the left. This is the Yasmina dog's pelvis, its hip on the right. Do you see something different? Something's wrong, right? Look at it. It has two sockets. It dislocated its hip at some point, and the femur, the ball joint of the femur, ground a new socket into the pelvis because it didn't get set properly. And so this dog lived an extremely ill life. Despite the ills, though, this dog was cared for. Someone fed her a special food, a special diet. Someone carried her around, and someone gave her a proper burial. It's a story about how this dog was loved. And using those kind of images shows and illustrates how zooarchaeologists come to these conclusions. So in this sense, show, don't tell. It's easy to tell how archaeology works. It's a lot more interesting to take specific examples like these gnawed bone styluses to talk about chewing on one's pencil, or these Frankish tower that Heinrich Schliemann destroyed on the Athenian Acropolis to talk about the renovation and preservation and presentation of archaeological sites. Focus on concrete examples to show your points, not just tell them. So it really does work. And there's been lots of studies of this, that when scholars and academics engage with the public, we actually have a greater impact than we think. Oftentimes it feels like when we get on Blue Sky or Facebook or podcasting or whatever, that it's mostly our colleagues or students that see what we're doing. And that is not true. It might be they're the ones that give feedback because they know you, but actually we oftentimes are singing from the rooftops. This study from 2018, I think, about public engagement on Twitter showed that all you really need is 1,000 followers on Twitter. And at that point, you're doing actual outreach. You're reaching ordinary people. You're also reaching journalists and politicians and decision makers, other teachers who include your stuff. And I discovered this very, very quickly. Immediately, I got feedback from the public saying how much they enjoyed my various Twitter threads. And very, very quickly, I got feedback from other scholars and professors and educators who would then assign my Twitter threads in the classroom to students. So double the impact. And even faster, I got impact with journalists and other writers following me who then look to me for inspiration in their own writing, as well as reaching influencers. If it was not for my Twitter thread, I would not have ended up debating Graham Hancock on Joe Rogan, and now I would not have the YouTube channel and the engagement that I have. In just a year, I've built my channel from just a few thousand subscribers to 50,000 with 1.8 million views, 357,000 watch hours. The Hancock debate, millions saw it, tens millions saw it, and other outreach platforms, I've had 3.2 million views, all just in this last year. And so this is something that if you put your effort in, it pays off. It does take regular, steady effort, and it takes being strategic. We can make a difference. So what can you do? Speak up. Don't let higher education be isolated. We need to be accessible during this current political environment. And we need to support our colleagues who are doing this work. We need to support them on social media by sharing their work, promoting them, leave a like, leave a comment on their social media posts. Do your own work to go on somebody's channel or podcast. Open invitation to anybody that wants to come on my YouTube channel and share your research. But also consider making your own videos and your own podcasts or writing your own essays. So if everybody here produces one video in the next year, and we convince all of our colleagues to produce one video, we can flood the internet with real archaeology and take on these pseudo-archaeologists. So what kind of content can us as experts and educators and professionals and grad students adapt successfully for the public? And most often what we think up first is to adapt our own research, right? And there's some pros to this. Look, we know our research better than anyone else. We are the world experts in the little tiny thing that we all research. So you know it cold. You can just talk and talk and talk and talk about it. At the same time, you love it. This is why you do it. It's always on your mind because you're constantly thinking about what you're researching. You're in conversations with colleagues, and you're doing it. This is your job, right? And then last of all, people love new stuff. This is the cutting edge of archaeology. So maybe it's what we should be presenting to the public. Now, I'm not against anybody presenting their own research, and I recommend you do some of that. But there are some big cons. What I've found is that when I present my own research to the public, it usually doesn't go very well. It does not go as viral or as effective as when I present other material. The reason why is it's very niche. I study isotope remains from animal teeth from specific sites in the Greek world. Super niche, right? And tough to get people interested in. And that said, niche can be good. If you're a good public communicator, you start off with something niche, a tooth, whatever it is, and then you go from there and it's great. But it's a harder sell to go with something so niche. Second of all, it's embedded in scholarly discourse. My research cites scholarship going back 100 years. It's built upon so much research and so much education and knowledge of how different methods work, and the knowledge of certain contexts and certain sites and certain classes of material, that it's sometimes very difficult to communicate to the public. We're so close to it because it's our research that it's difficult to actually explain it to somebody who doesn't have the context, that frame of reference. And it also, because it's our own research, we oftentimes fall into using more scholarly jargon and professional jargon when discussing our research. So in many ways, the problem is when we discuss our own research for the public, what we do is we miss the forest and we're focused on those trees. And that's a problem because for the public, getting them to see the forest is oftentimes what it makes for effective public engagement. And so what I want to say is your own research works really well when you're working with other science communicators. So say you come on my YouTube channel, or you talk with Milo Rossi or a journalist or someone else's podcast. Fantastic, because those people then work to help frame your research in a way that works for the public. They add context to that. They ask the generic, simple questions that build into the relevance of your specific niche of your research, right? But when it's just you alone on your own podcast or your own blog or your own Twitter thread or your own YouTube channel, it's really difficult to communicate your own research because of all these cons. It's fun and easy, but it's tough. So instead, what I always tell colleagues and what I will tell you all to do is to focus instead on teaching and learning content. This is the material that is fairly easy to adapt. One, if you're a grad student, it could be a lecture you recently heard and loved from your professor. Two, if you're a teacher, you know this stuff cold because you've given these lectures to your students. So you know it really well, right? And it's already designed for an introductory level for students who don't understand the methods or the concepts or the context. Third, it's already been tested on real people, your students, maybe yourself as a student, right? And so, and lastly, it not only has it been tested, it's designed with having real learning outcomes, lessons that the audience will learn. And so it actually has that added benefit of a lesson in addition to an interesting story. And we can apply all the kind of pedagogical tools and pedagogical methods that we all care about when teaching students to our public engagement. Lastly, I should have mentioned this before, when we talk about what we are experts in, we have this kind of expert voice, just a sense of, I don't know, we just come off as a bit more of an expert when we're talking about what we're an expert in. If on the other hand, you're teaching, you have on your sort of teaching voice. And we all know that our teaching voice is a little different than the voice we use when giving a conference presentation. And that teaching voice is far more accessible to the general public. And it's a persona that we have all sort of mastered at times as well. Lastly, your teaching includes a series of fun and interesting case studies, articles written by colleagues that are chosen because they illustrate those larger points. And those work especially well because you can highlight how the field works as a kind of network and an ecosystem where we all build on each other and our knowledge to be able to create what we do in our field and our discipline. So there are cons that I need to make sure that we recognize when we do adapt our teaching and learning content. In a class, we have the same students week in, week out, so we kind of scaffold our plans where we build upon what we learned the week before. You can't really do that as effectively with public engagement. You need to assume that each time you produce a piece of content, it's for a brand new audience, even if there are some repeat listeners. With enough time and effort, you can have a committed audience, but that takes a lot of time and effort. And so you need to approach it at first as if everything is for a blank slate. Second of all, students are on average less hostile than certain hostile members of the general public. So that's obviously a con. That's gonna make things tough. There's copyright and permissions issues that you don't need to worry about in a classroom that you will if you present stuff publicly. I have some talks on this later on today. And then lastly, you're very used to speaking to students. You're comfortable being yourself after a few weeks with the same group of students. You're less comfortable having that kind of personality in front of a mic or a computer. And that's just something that to me, I think takes practice, but it is a con for sure. But my main conclusion is you should be focusing on adapting educational content rather than your research. It's far easier, far more effective. You have PowerPoints and materials already ready, as well as case studies. You just need to reframe each of them to add some context and make it catchy and engaging, which Milo will be talking to you about a lot. I do want to end this by adapting one of my lectures that I've given before on pseudoscience and how to approach that for the public. Pseudoscience is very popular and trendy. That's good for us to therefore take advantage of that popularity to teach people. And it matters right now. Misinformation is a really big topic in our world, and we're all experts. But on the other hand, we need to realize there's a lot of missteps we can make. We can amplify these pseudoscientists when we address them. You can receive outright hatred, and it requires a lot more work than you think. You can't just talk off the cuff when you're addressing pseudoscience. You need to really think through how to frame your argument and your tone and how to modulate that carefully. I'm just going to quickly end this little segment with the bits of 9 pieces of advice I give to people when I give this lecture at the universities about how to engage with pseudoscience. But a lot of these actually make sense for just normal public engagement. Number one, always punch up. Don't target low-level pseudoscientists. You risk amplifying them. If you're going to address pseudoscientific claims, address the big boys and the big girls that already have large audiences. Don't amplify small beans accounts. 2, don't give them the floor. It's easy to say extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, so show me your evidence. No. Social media is easy for people to copy and paste shit in. Don't get caught up in some back and forth that can amplify someone's narratives. Instead, you should be taking every opportunity you can to share your education, your knowledge with the public. That's why you're there on social media in the public sphere, is to share your knowledge and expertise, not to listen to pseudoscientists talk up their BS. 3rd, act deliberately, not emotionally. Do your homework. So many people talk about Graham Hancock as if he promotes ancient aliens. He does not. And his followers then say, you're addressing the wrong person. He's much more logical and plausible than ancient aliens. So if you're going to address something, do your research. Make sure you know what you're addressing. Define the context, not a few facts. This is really important as educators and professionals. We're not here to just debunk some specific little fact. Instead, lay out the context of knowledge, of expertise, and how our field works, or the regional context for a specific claim. That's going to make sure that what you teach is more sticky and apparent rather than just zooming in on the specific little fact that you're debunking. Flip the script. In many ways, remember, all publicity is good publicity. I take advantage of this all the time. Heighten the drama, get into some arguments, and you can actually get a lot of attention, which therefore lets you educate the public because they're paying attention to you. On that level, similarly, drama and edutainment gets eyeballs. Be funny, be entertaining, include taboo subjects. And be on the offensive, not the defensive when addressing pseudoscience. So pre-bunk rather than debunk. So, educate rather than just respond. Be supportive of all the larger network and ecosystem of public archaeology communicators. There's a lot of different tones, voices, identities. We all need to step up, and we should all support one another and support our rights to speak up. So let's build community, build festivals, build networks, and reward each other that are doing this work. Let's fight for this kind of work to count in hiring and promotion in academia. You saw what on YouTube? Nah, I dug at that site. It wasn't aliens, it was people from thousands of years ago. I'm here to tell you the internet is filled with fake archaeology.
Now, this sounds absolutely insane, and I'm aware of how this sounds.
Rome wasn't real.
As the Watchers and the Nephilim and the Anunnaki.
Create something called physiostatic electricity as it ran underneath that magnetized crystal granite.
Let's talk about Atlantis.
So it's time to push back with some real archaeology. On the weekend of October 25th, over 50 archaeology communicators are joining forces for an online festival of real archaeology. We're a group of scholars and professionals, amateurs and enthusiasts. All of us love real archaeology and our human past. We've been sharing factual entertainment on YouTube, podcasts, TikToks, blogs, and more. And it's time to join forces and show everybody why real archaeology is so much more interesting than all that shit. Check out our lineup at www.real-archaeology.com. We'll be filling up the internet everywhere, so don't miss out on some real archaeology. It rocks. And lastly, just remember to be yourself. Have fun with it, whether you're podcasting, writing, or doing videos. It's going to take some time for you to feel confident to just kind of be yourself, like you end up doing after you teach a few terms, and then you end up being yourself with your students. It's the same thing while talking online or writing for the online public. Always try to challenge yourself to add more of your personality and your authenticity to it. Thank you all. I'm easily accessible on social media or email. Please reach out. I'd love to talk more about this. Thank you all.